Well, good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast, and let's get Series 2 started this week with Mailbag Monday. Now, during the first 8 weeks of today's Tolkien Times, I've had variations on a question from several listeners. When will we get the first Touring Alan's Bookcase segment? I wish you would talk about all the Tolkien books I see behind you. Could you do a bookshelf tour? I would love to see your Tolkien book collection on a Mailbag Monday. Look, I'm happy to oblige. Now, clearly, this will be a slightly better experience for those of you watching on YouTube, but podcast listeners, I have not forgotten about you, and I will do my very best to describe any individual volume that I pull off the shelf. Though today, I don't think I'll be doing any of that. I'm just going to be walking through the shelves themselves. Now, I should also say that for more on this exact question, follow @PrancingPonyPod on TikTok, where I've done 12 mini episodes of The Shelves of the West, showing off many individual volumes. So be sure to follow that account and watch for your favorites. Now, with that said, I want to start with an overview of the way that I've got these organized. It's tricky, that. Yes, I more than doubled the linear inches of my shelving when I replaced my old IKEA bookshelf with these string shelves, but there's still not enough room for me to do this the way I'd like. I'd prefer it if more of these shelves had a little visual space instead of being completely stuffed to the gills. But at least I'm able to get most, not all, but most of my Tolkien books on here. Now, I'm going to go top to bottom, left to right as you look at the screen as best I can. For those of you listening on audio only, the shelves are minimalist, white on white with just rails, 3 columns of 6 shelves each. Now, starting at the top, I split my firsts between the top left and top right. These are all first edition, first impression copies of mostly Tolkien works, including Smith of Wootton Major, Farmer Giles of Ham, Tree and Leaf, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, the 1969 India paper Lord of the Rings, and matching special editions of The Hobbit and Poems and Stories. On the other side are The Road Goes Ever On, the Father Christmas letters, later editions are known as Letters from Father Christmas, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Pearl and Sir Orfeo, The Silmarillion, both US and UK, Unfinished Tales, Letters, The Monsters and the Critics, Roverandom, Finn and Hengist, and Mr. Bliss. Now, my hope is to collect first UK editions of everything except for The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, as those are well beyond my means. I might someday be able to get a first edition set of The Lord of the Rings, but certainly not first impressions. They'd probably be 9th, 10th, 12th impressions, that kind of thing. Now, most of these are UK impressions, with the exception of Farmer Giles, Tree and Leaf, and The Road Goes Ever On. But since Road was actually first published in the US by Houghton Mifflin, I'm actually fine with that. The other 2, I'm still tracking down UK first impressions. Now, in the middle, mostly because the shelf is high up, I've put my audiobook collection on CD. Martin Shaw's narration of The Silmarillion, Rob Inglis's narrations of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, Christopher Lee's rendition of The Children of Húrin, a fantastic collection from the BBC for Tales from the Perilous Realm, I can't recommend that highly enough, and the Andy Serkis versions of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. Now, I know his version of The Silmarillion just released, and I'm trying to find a physical copy. My favorite one here, though, is the J.R.R. Tolkien audio collection, featuring the voices of the professor and his son as they each read selections from the Legendarium. It is fantastic stuff. Now, the second shelf on my left is what I call my reading hardbacks. The single volume editions may often be gorgeous, but they're not always as readable as the 3 volume editions. And this set right here is particularly nice. The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, illustrated by Alan Lee, The Silmarillion by Ted Naismith, and Unfinished Tales, featuring both of them plus John Howe, all in a lovely custom leather slipcase from Tolkien Bookshelf. The middle and right shelves on the second level house my complete set of recent deluxe editions of Tolkien's works. They're pretty, and some have some very nice extras, like the CD in the Battle of Maldon, with the professor and his son Christopher playing the 2 parts in the homecoming of Beorhtnoth, Beorhthelm's son. All of those except for The Lord of the Rings are first impressions. Now, I think I have time for one more shelf here. The third shelf down on the right is where I keep my signed editions. This single-volume centenary edition of The Lord of the Rings is something I brought with me to a book signing shortly after Jackson's Fellowship came out, January of 2002, I believe. It's signed by Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Sean Astin. Now, I know there are some who will say that lowers its value. Sorry, I don't apologize for enjoying the films, even if they weren't the perfect adaptations. The next one is an Alan Lee illustrated edition of The Hobbit. Signed and numbered, only 600 were made. The next is one of my favorite books on the entire shelf. It is a Ted Naismith illustrated Silmarillion, one of only 500, signed both by Naismith and Christopher Tolkien. That's this copy right here. And then here's another Naismith Silmarillion, the first impression signed by Ted, and then a super deluxe edition of The Children of Húrin, one of only 500, signed by both Alan Lee and Christopher Tolkien. Then there's a set of first edition first impressions of the Great Tales, each signed by Alan Lee, and then some Tolkien-related works also signed. Humphrey Carpenter's biography of Tolkien, John Garth's Tolkien in the Great War, and Tolkien at Exeter College, along with Tom Shippey's The Road to Middle-earth. All of those are first edition first impressions. Now, I suppose there's enough time for the third shelf on the left as well. These are my other hardback editions of the primary Middle-earth works, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion, including another Alan Lee illustrated Hobbit, Douglas A. Anderson's annotated Hobbit, a Jemima Catlin illustrated Hobbit, the first edition facsimile gift set of The Hobbit. I love this one. It's a fascinating look at a book that none of us is ever likely to see, let alone own. And then a couple of single-volume hardbacks of The Lord of the Rings, including last year's special edition illustrated by Tolkien and an Alan Lee illustrated version. Then there's a folio version or Folio Society version of the Silmarillion, a German language special edition, and a Tolkien illustrated one that's fairly recent as well. Now, next week, we'll look at the rest of the shelves before we head back to proper mailbag questions. For today, though, that wraps it up for Mailbag Monday. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, please email it to barnleman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Let him know it's for today's Tolkien Times, and I'll get to it soon. For a deeper dive into Tolkien, listen to the Prancing Pony Podcast, my award-winning show with more than 7 years working our way through the Legendarium and answering mailbag questions, well, maybe not just like this one, but some good mailbag questions. Please join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Tolkien Tuesday as we learn more about the professor himself. Please like and subscribe on YouTube and follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.